Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to be doing a tier list for the values in Europa Universalis 5. For this, before we get into it, just want to discuss how our ranking system is working, as well as how the video is going to work. So with our ranking systems, we are going to be ranking stuff in terms of power level in isolation. And so what this will be is which ones of these are the strongest. I think none of the values are net negative, so it is going to be better to be plus 100 towards either side of the value for all the values, rather than being at 0 most of the time, although there are maybe situations where particular values are spun into a negative sort of segment. And so roughly speaking, you can think of it in terms of the stuff that's in S and A tier. This is going to warp the way that you play around these values, and the stuff that's in C or D tier, a little bit more convenience oriented. If it's easy to push the value, you will push it based on what preference you have, and so this sort of thing. As we go through each value, we will have a bit more of a nuanced discussion on the value, where we will discuss things like pushing one value towards the other. Is one always clearly better than the other in terms of the spectrum, like centralization versus decentralization? Is one of them always better? We will also be discussing some of the ways in which the nature of the values is phasic, where you might have a value that you acquire late in the game that has a bonus, which you would really appreciate early on in the game, but since it's acquired late in the game, you were still going to have it lower on the ranking system because overall, over the course of the game, the value of the value, shocker, is not as high as you would maybe think of it. And finally, we're also going to talk about things in terms of opportunity cost. How expensive is it to go particular values? Some values are very strong, but they're not worth going because it's too expensive in terms of what you have to give up in order to be able to push these values. And so this will be a consideration, but that will make it not so that they score low because the opportunity cost is so high, just because we want to have a consistent type of ranking system, and then talk about the nuance as it relates to whether or not you actually go them when we kind of have the discussion on the value itself. All right, so let's jump in. So let's start with talking about a decentralization and the centralization values. We're going to jump into game to be able to take a closer look at these. So centralization is going to be, we're not going to beat around the bush here, it is by far the strongest value, and it is really important to push for. And not only that, in the early phases of the game, it is extraordinarily strong because you do not have a lot of crown power bonuses yet. If we take a look at ourselves in Egypt, we notice that's not a very long list. That's only 4 things that are applying centralization. As you have less of a percentage modifier, it effectively is more valuable. And so in the very early phases of the game, centralization is insane for avoiding the crown power malice. Now later on in the game, it's much less important, but also proximity cost is one of the best modifiers in the entire game. This modifier also gets stronger as time goes on. As you acquire more and more proximity bonuses, they effectively have increasing marginal returns because they are discount modifiers. And so overall, either 50% crown power in the early game, incredibly strong, or 10% proximity cost just entirely is incredibly strong. And having these two together makes this, in my opinion, kind of a bit of a non-negotiable value, and also something that you generally, unless your run start is strange or weird for some reason, you generally want to open with pushing for centralization very, very actively. And so what this means is this is going to warp some of the things that you go for in game, like communal lands, for example, in terms of revoking priority. This is a really high revoke priority because this is going to give you progress towards decentralization, which is not something you want. You notice we have 44 progress. In order to gain positive progress, we're going to do stuff like revoking that. But coming back into our values to talk about decentralization, decentralization is also pretty strong. 5% estate satisfaction is really good. It's especially good in the early game before you have a bunch of sources of estate satisfaction equilibrium, because this will allow you to tax your estates more. If you're going at equilibrium types of spending or taxation levels, a lot of these estates will not be fully taxable. And so by getting estate satisfaction equilibrium, you can push towards this type of thing. In practice, we don't want to go decentralization very often because centralization decentralization is so good, but the value itself is relatively strong. Also, loyalty of subjects, a pretty nice modifier, allowing you to blob out with subjects quite a bit more. Loyalty of subjects itself can be kind of a bit of a weird modifier. If you have really high pop subjects, they're kind of hard to keep loyal anyways, but if you have low pop kind of subjects, you're in Europe, this type of thing, this will allow you to blob a lot more with subjects, but I don't think it's really viable to go for decentralization, even though it by itself is going to be so strong. So coming into things, we are going to rank them up into S tier, the clearly Sest of tiers for centralization, and into B tier for decentralization. Definitely a very solid value, but not one that is worth going for very early. So next up, let's talk about Traditionalist and Innovative. In particular, both of these feel like phasically good in the early game, and then kind of not so important as time goes on. I do think Innovative is just generally overall going to be stronger, but jumping in and taking a look at these, 2.5% of state satisfaction equilibrium is something we're pretty happy about. We get minus or plus institution embracement cost. The biggest thing on this is going to be stability in terms of what's important, and so since you are getting this minus stability investment cost, this kind of washes it out. It's probably net positive towards pushing stability, and stability in particular is going to be good in the early game, mainly because you really want to avoid having negative stability. Your stability in the positive doesn't give you too much satisfaction equilibrium, but in the negative it gives you a big fat malice, and so you do want to avoid that in particular, and so this helps you to avoid that. But as time goes on, your stability, let's say, stabilizes, and it's easier to maintain positive stability, especially once you're past the opening salvo of the game. You get past the Black Plague, which has negative stab events, and so it becomes much less important. You also get pop promotion speed. Pop promotion speed, kind of a good modifier, but a modifier that you get a lot more of as time goes on, and it becomes less important, and you become, generally speaking, less throttled by pop promotion speed in a lot of ways. There's a lot of sources of it. Literacy is a really strong source of it. Also a really strong source of it is going to be control, and also a really strong source of it is going to be free subjects, which we will get into later, but all of this together kind of means that in the early game, you can value, in particular, your ability to push stab, because it's going to help with the qualifications, but this really falls off as time goes on. Talking about innovative, you are going to have embrace institution cost minus and plus stability investment cost. Overall, this is kind of a little bit of a wash, but I do think that this means that you are going to eat a little bit more stab embracing your institutions early. I think as a matter of practice, if you are going to be close to embracing institutions and you are towards traditionalist, you don't really want to push it innovative, but after a little bit, pushing innovative will be good. It gives you a little bit of cultural influence. This is one where it's really good until you get cultural hegemon, and then it kind of falls off. You have culture war battles between your influence and other people's tradition, but if you completely wipe them off the map, which is often the case, their tradition falls really low and you just auto-win. Or if you have enough cultural influence, you have enough flat modifiers, you are overcoming people's tradition by a large enough margin that doing stuff like annexing them, you're already hitting the cap in terms of the benefit anyways. And so this plus 100%, while it is a big modifier, is effectively much less valuable because it is a dead modifier once you hit cap. But max literacy is something that scales pretty well. It's kind of diluted in some extent in terms of its primary use, research speed, because you will end up getting a lot of percentage research speed modifiers as time goes on, and this effectively dilutes the power of the literacy. But you will also have other bonuses from literacy. Taking a look at here, you will see probably the biggest one is going to be on the peasants in the pop promotion speed, and so that is going to be a really big one, where you will get double your literacy and pop promotion speed, and especially in the early game, this is going to be quite valuable. You also have a bunch of other stuff that's pretty solid, like the monthly dev growth on the burgers gets up to 25%. That's quite a lot. In particular, it's bad on slaves because it does give a little bit of extra unrest. You get some stuff from the nobles, you get some stuff from the clergy, but really the powerful one is, in my opinion, going to be on the peasants. And so while it is better in the early game, innovative kind of does scale pretty well, or it scales okay enough. Both of these are kind of early game values. I think they're really overshadowed by centralization, and if centralization were not a thing, intentionally pushing innovative and traditionalist in the early-ish game would be a much more powerful play pattern. So we are going to pretend like our browser was not minimized, and we are going to slot these things in. We are going to put into C tier, we are going to be putting in innovative, and then into D tier, we are going to be putting in our what is the Traditionalist, which is the fireplace, the campfire. And so this is where we're going to have them. It's not that innovative is bad, it's just not necessarily a high priority. I must say, though, that innovative, generally speaking, in terms of opportunity cost, most of the privileges and laws and such that are good push you towards innovative anyways, so going innovative is really, really free. And so you should just generally be going innovative because of all the things that are pushing you in that direction anyways. And it's not worth, it's definitely not worth, even if traditionalism was up here, it would still be probably the case you want to go innovative, because it is so easy to go innovative based on where you are already pushed in terms of the game's direction. So next up, we have a Spiritualist versus Humanist. And first up, we do have the possible clerics in towns and cities. Now, this is not a flat amount. I believe this is per 1,000 or something like this, but it is going to give you a lot more clerics in towns and cities. This is going to have two major effects. First of all, by giving yourself a lot more clerics, you are going to increase the flat number that are being considered for the power level of the estates. This is going to increase the proportional share of the ulama, and also if they have a ton of state privileges, it will increase their share relative to crown power as well. And so it will push them up. But if they have comparatively less state privileges than stuff like the Umara and the burghers, it will actually technically increase crown power. But the second thing is a little bit more subtle and interesting, which is that the pops themselves, the ulama pops, are actually going to be having more expenses than peasants. And so by turning peasants into clerics, you will stimulate the economy by having more buy orders, and specifically, they have buy orders of a lot of paper, books, cloth, and fine cloth. All of these are relatively nice industries to be pushing, and so it gives you more profitable opportunities to be building these buildings, so you do have a little bit of an economic stimulus that is maybe not intuitive. That's what you're getting from possible clerics in towns and cities. This is probably overall the strongest aspect of Spiritualist, in my opinion, but it is a much less robust effect than the burghers and the nobles in terms of stimulus, because the clerics, as far as we can tell, do not eat so much more than the peasants, just a little bit more. And so, next up we get pop conversion speed and pop assimilation speed. And this is the thing. In order to core an area, it needs to be integrated, and you need to accept their culture or have them be primary culture. You no longer require a religious component, so converting pops does not gate you from coring. You can core areas just fine without it. And so, coming into here, you can see that these areas are not cored. If we accept these pops, they would become cored. And you can see what you get from integrated is just plus 5 max control. From cored, it is plus 20 control. So that's 15 more extra control, in addition to other nice factors. And so it is going to be easier to push to integrate areas or to fully core areas if you are not on Spiritualist. Also, you receive more antagonism for attacking people not of your religion. You also get tolerance of the true faith, but honestly, you have so much true faith tolerance anyways that this is maybe not that useful. It increases your satisfaction of pops, so in theory, you could tax them more before they get rebellious in terms of what's happening with them. But having your negative satisfaction on your estates has its own penalties, independent of whether or not the pops will rebel. Is such that I don't really think that tolerance of true faith is anywhere near as useful as tolerance on heretics or heathens, because your ability to avoid revolutions and this type of stuff on your primary culture, primary faith is already reasonably high. That's really not going to move the needle all that much in that regard, unless you're doing something funky, which you maybe shouldn't be doing anyways. So the primary benefit you're getting is these possible clerics in towns and cities. This does have an economic stimulus effect, though, that's interesting. I just don't think it's strong enough to really make it a prioritization. And then you also do have Humanist. Now, Humanist gives you the the reverse, where you are losing pop conversion speed and you're regaining pop assimilation speed. This is going to make it faster for you to core areas. If you are looking to conquer a lot and core a lot, this humanist value becomes a lot better. You also receive less antagonism off of people, or people receive less antagonism points towards you when you do a little bit of a naughty thing against another religion, and then you get tolerance of heretical and heathen beliefs, which I think is more valuable because these people have less tolerance in general. Each point of tolerance, either positive or negative, is going to result in 5% satisfaction, making it really easy to hit the threshold where you're joining revs on tolerance of heathens, and is going to make it much more valuable that you accept their faith for the purposes of avoiding revolutions and avoiding a little bit of nastiness. And so Humanist is going to be a bit better in that regard, also a bit better on the expansion. So let's come back into the browser here and rank these guys. We are going to put Spiritualist ahead of Traditionalist here in D tier, and then into C tier we will be placing Humanist, and we will be placing it just slightly ahead of Decentralization. Alright, so next up we have Aristocracy versus Plutocracy, and much like Spiritualist, which has the possible clerics of towns and cities, Aristocracy and Plutocracy will be giving it to nobles and burghers respectively. And this is a really robust effect. It's a robust economic effect because burghers and nobles really eat a lot of goods. They eat a lot more goods. And this is going to have a stimulating effect on the economy, as we mentioned before, just for different estates instead, where they will be eating goods of particular kinds of nature. Both will be slightly different, but they will be stimulating the economy by virtue of you having more of them. Now, if they ever make it so that they scale with income, this will be much less of an effect. You can see here, for example, the nobles are eating a lot more horses and weaponry, which generally speaking I think are kind of worse industries than the fine cloth, but both of these are going to have a stimulating effect. Overall, I do think the effect is going to be a little bit bigger on the burghers, or quite a bit bigger on the burghers, because burghers eat twice as much as a noble does, burghers eat half as much as a noble does, but you're getting 100 versus 10. However, on a per pop basis, if you are really promoting out all your pops off of being peasants, then in theory, Aristocracy is more pop efficient at stimulus, okay? And this is the biggest factor. It is going to enormously affect how powerful these estates are as well, by giving you really a lot of nobles. This is going to be your biggest source of nobles, or lack of nobles if you push Plutocracy. And it is very, very warping on the nobles specifically. Burghers, eventually you get a lot of burghers because you are building buildings that have burgher potentials. All of the economic buildings that are building buildings are going to have this in their kind of nature, and so, or all the urban oriented ones are going to hire burghers. You can see this is hiring 400 burghers, and so you're going to get a lot of burghers no matter what. However, if you get rid of this, you will really significantly decrease the amount of nobles you have if you move away from Aristocracy. And so this is a big deal, and generally speaking, phasically or for specific runs, a lot of runs will start off with a really, really nasty privilege on the nobles. We don't start with it here, but the one we are thinking of, the one we are throwing much shade at, or do we start with it? Do we start with it now? They might have changed it so that they start with it, where it is going to be the, banal lordship, -5 control everywhere. Getting off of this is really good. You can see it costs 171 stab. And so generally speaking, as a matter of prioritization, going aristocrat, going plutocratic, they're both pretty strong, but if you have something like banal lordship, you have to prioritize going plutocratic to be able to get off of it. Another thing is that your nobles will also give you a lot of levies. So in the first 3 ages when levies are good, or if you have a bonus for noble levies, someone playing something with like France, pushing aristocracy is also going to be really good. So there's really kind of more of an interplay kind of way of thinking of it for aristocracy and plutocracy as a result of these potential pops. And so this really, really, more than any other thing, is going to warp your nation. I guess to some extent capital economy versus traditional will also warp your nation quite a lot. But okay. You're also getting this nobles power. This is not really a big effect in terms of your nobles' overall power. Almost all of it's coming from the flat amount of nobles that you're getting, not the percentage modifier. You already have a bunch of nobles percentage modifier. This is not going to drive it. Discipline, 5% is quite strong. This is a very strong military modifier. This makes aristocracy much more viable or better when in a lot of ways it is going to be inconvenient and annoying. But a discipline is going to give 5% and plus 2% expected cost of court. This is kind of expensive. Generally speaking, I think this slider is the biggest expense for a lot of countries. Some countries like Japan, though, will have basically zero spending on this, in which case, if you have a bunch of modifiers that give you flat legitimacy, you can see we do not. We have accepted primary culture, like this type of stuff. We have 29 or 0.29 trend, and so we have 0.61 that we have to effectively pay for to keep legitimacy capped. If you have a bunch of modifiers, then going aristocratic is a lot more attractive because the effective cost on expected cost of court goes down. But okay, this is going to make things more expensive. Plutocracy is going to give you, again, the burger power. Again, not a big modifier. Trade efficiency. Trade efficiency is not really that strong a modifier. You kind of don't care. The bigger economic stimulus is going to be the decreased cost of court, which is going to be useful. But there's another thing I think that's really valuable about plutocracy in particular, is that it makes your, especially if you're a navally oriented nation, but generally speaking, the burghers, in terms of your parliaments, value better things. And so you generally would prefer a burgher-oriented parliament. That way you have give out agendas to the burghers. And so by having powerful burghers, you will make your parliaments way more comfortable and way easier. And so this is something that feels incredibly nice about the burghers. You will get to click a lot more buttons. You will get a lot better outcomes overall. And again, especially if you're pushing naval in particular, it is going to be very nice to have a burgher kind of a strong burghers in terms of your estates. That way you will have much more juice. Well, you can see now with 2%, if we click on one of their agendas, we'll get virtually nothing. If we had really strong burghers, we would get a whole lot out of them. And so I do think that this is probably one of the bigger values of plutocracy as well, really smoothing out the entire parliament game in terms of the way we're looking at it. But I think both are pretty solid. So going either max aristocracy or max plutocracy is going to be good. You really don't want to be stuck in the middle on either of this. So let's jump back into the browser and throw these guys up in the rankings here. Now, for these are both incredibly hard for me to rank in terms of which one's better than the other, but I think what we're going to do is we're going to throw aristocracy ahead of plutocracy with some really heavy-handed asterisks that one of these is probably going to be way better for your country, and it's going to depend country to country which one of these guys is going to be better, but pushing 100 towards either of them is going to be very valuable for you and something you want to go out of your way to do. In terms of opportunity cost, very often you will need to go out of your way to go plutocracy, although I think for the countries where plutocracy is better, specifically if you're getting off of banal lordship, it is super worth. Maybe we put plutocracy slightly ahead, I really don't know, but for some countries, maybe it's also just the case you view aristocracy as being just better in the early game and plutocracy being better in the late game for the majority of countries, and some countries you really value plutocracy early. And so maybe we'll keep it like this, but both of these are going to be quite strong, and you can transition from one to the other. In particular, there's a lot of useful or easy ways to push nobility. Let's actually jump into game real quick and take a look at one of them. But there's a lot of events you will get that will push aristocracy a whole lot, and then also you could just ennoble people. You just come into people. It's one of the easiest ones to push. We just need to find someone that's not a noble, ennoble him. This will cost us 10 legitimacy, so it does have a significant cost, but it pushes us 5 towards aristocracy. So it's really easy to push aristocracy quite quickly with this character interaction. I do think it has a cooldown, but being able to push 5 on command is going to be something that... Wait, does it just not? Or did we just not click the button correctly? Here, let's do this. Let's ennoble him. Let's click OK. Let's ennoble him here. Okay, and then we will push a 5 towards aristocracy. So he will also swap estates to the nobility here as well. It is also worth noting for spiritualist aristocracy and plutocracy, specifically having a member of the corresponding estate belonging to your cabinet will allow you to roll in Parliament a debate, which will push you plus 10 towards each of those respective things: Aristocracy, Spiritualist, and Plutocracy. And so if you are specifically looking to push Plutocracy, you absolutely want to have at least one member of your cabinet be a member of the burgher estate. Alright, next up we have a serfdom versus free subjects. Now, the biggest thing here by far is the max tax. And so that's going to be the biggest thing that we are going to be talking about, but you get plus 20% max tax. This is absolutely incredible. Really allows you to tax people way, way, way more, as long as you have the satisfaction behind it to support it. And for some countries, especially rural countries, countries where you're leaving these RGOs unurbanized because they're really valuable, stuff like gold. So if you're playing something like Mali, Hungary, this type of countries, this is going to be really valuable. Also in the early game in particular, on a lot of these countries, even the raw materials output is going to be really good. Now, a lot of industries will get raw materials output, like iron will get like 66% and then 75% in the tree. From gold, you get like plus 200% from mercury patio. So for a lot of industries, this does get diluted out, but for a lot, it doesn't. And so this ended up being really a large amount of extra raw materials. And so if a big portion of your income is rural areas, this is going to generate for you a lot of additional income. Supply limit's not really that big a deal. Neither is peasant food consumption. It's important to note that on a per pop basis, peasants consume a lot less food anyways, but if you have a lot of them, they are going to eat a lot of food. Here we have 150k peasants eating 126 food, and we have 170 or 1700 nobles eating 35 foods, so we're eating 4 times as much for 100 times as many pops, and especially as this gets diluted down as you urbanize areas, it is going to be basically kind of a non-factor. But as you're urbanizing, a lot more of your tax estate is going to be going burghers, which dilutes the value of this maximum tax for peasant estate. If you're playing a hyper-urbanized Italy, this is not really something that you really care about that much, but if you're playing something rural, it is going to be quite strong. Free subjects is kind of this... it's oblique in terms of how you're evaluating it, and okay, you have this minus max tax, and this is going to be a bit of a consideration this is a bad modifier, but you also have these other things that are a little bit weird to evaluate. And so the present food consumption minus, that's fine, that's whatever, but the pop promotion speed, very strong in the early game. If you're throttled by pops, this can be really meaningfully important, and also in the early game pretty strong, and also strong throughout this game is this monthly prosperity. Now, you need to have... Prosperity is a huge driver of two things: development and population growth. It's roughly 40% of your maximum population growth that you could get is important for you to be at 100 development. But once you're at 100 development, additional prosperity is not very useful. You can see here, we have really bad average satisfaction. We have a couple things pushing us towards prosperity, and we're only growing 0.02. This is unacceptably low. You need to have some sources of this. But a lot of countries do have sources of like this. Like Poland starts with a tech that gives it to them. I think it's either a tech or a privilege that Castile starts with that gives prosperity to them. So whatever you're doing, you're going to need to probably generate additional monthly prosperity, unless you're monoculture, monofaith, where your satisfaction is very high. You're going to need to generate prosperity somewhere. And so you can do it through going free subjects, or you can do it, for a lot of countries, from going decentralized bureaucracy, which pushes you away from centralization, so that will have its own costs, but this is going to be an opportunity cost factor. Here we have bureaucracy, you can go decentralized bureaucracy. This is the most straightforward way for most countries to push prosperity. So if you want to go free sub, or if you want to go serfdom, you will likely have to go decentralized bureaucracy along with it. So this is a bit of an opportunity cost, and there's also another really, really substantive opportunity cost when it comes to going towards serfdom, which nominally kind of just like looks a lot better, because it is a lot better, and that is, you need to maintain a positive trend towards serfdom, and this is kind of expensive to do, because your ability to tax your peasants, you generally want to keep their satisfaction high, so you want to give a lot of privileges out that give them satisfaction. A lot of their privileges that they get will give you one of two things: a trend towards decentralization, or as we saw here with the communal lands, which we don't want to give out, or they will give a trend towards free subjects, which is the opposite of serfdom, right? And so, generally speaking, it is expensive to get satisfaction, or is it expensive to go for serfdom and simultaneously be able to maintain high peasant satisfaction, because you'll need to give up a lot of decentralization. And so you are really pressured by your peasant satisfaction very, very hard for going serfdom. And because of that, even though serfdom's absolutely incredible, very often you don't want to go serfdom anyways, in addition to not wanting to go serfdom specifically so that you can solve your prosperity problem. But this is maybe one of the few values where you do not want to push it towards 100, even if you want some of it. Because once you get some of the prosperity handled, marginal prosperity is not really that useful. You still might want the maximum tax. Also, once you get enough promotion speed, a marginal promotion speed stops being useful once that is not the thing that throttles you. So pushing a little bit towards free subjects, maybe 30 or 40 or 50 or something like this, is going to be viable and probably better than zeroing out. And you're going to acquire a little bit of a trend anyways in a lot of cases. And so this is a bit of an interesting one, but it's also going to vary really hard from country to country. Some countries will have an easy time pushing serfdom. A country like Castile both have prosperity that is free for them, and they have two unique peasant privileges, which I think don't give free subjects, allowing them to get 10% satisfaction towards serfdom. And so for them, going this would be very, very easy. And for Japan as well, we would also like to go very, very hard into that. I believe it's in our faith that we have an additional huge trend with purity, where if we max this out, we will get plus 20% peasant to state satisfaction equilibrium. So that has it handled. We don't have to give out all this free subject nonsense, and we can still maintain a max tax. And also, we have absolutely insane resources in the form of gold and silver, these types of things, and spices, and silk, just everything. We have it all. And so it's not going to be as important that we do this, that we go for free subjects. And so this one is going to be a little bit interesting. It's going to vary a lot from run to run, but let's jump into the browser and also rank these guys up. So coming in here, we are going to find the free subjects, which are right here, and also the free subjects aren't next to the other ones? All right, well, fair enough. These are the free subjects. We're going to put them into B tier here, and we're going to put them behind centralization. And then for serfdom, we are going to be putting the serfdom into A tier. The serfdom itself is very good. I just think for the majority of runs, it's not going to be worth the cost going it. And so you're going to end up sinking it, and the little bit of prosperity on the free subjects is going to allow you in your bureaucracy law to push centralized bureaucracy, which gives you more decentralization points. And so this is a little bit of an interesting one where serfdom is the highest ranked thing that we have here, where I think it's very often the case that you don't want to go it, especially going to vary country to country. Alright, so next up is Belligerent and Conciliatory, which is fairly straightforward. The one that will be maybe confusing is the antagonism given from X modifier. This affects how much antagonism that you get that's generated on you when the AI does something. And so if the AI takes land, you will generate less antagonism if you are very belligerent than if you were more conciliatory. This means that if you have a bunch of conciliatory AIs around you, they will generate a lot more, when you take stuff, you will generate a lot more antagonism on them by virtue of this. And so this is to the extent that it matters, but in terms of what you're deciding to push, this is just going to affect your ability to join coalitions, which is kind of whatever. We have casus belli creation speed. Don't really care about this. Once you have already invested the diplomats to generate the spy network to be able to generate the casus belli, don't really care too much how quickly it generates, I don't think, or at least in my opinion. If you're proactive about it, the timing becomes less of a factor. Right? If you are always waiting for your war to finish before starting to generate your spy network, then this might slow you down. But if you're generating a spy network for the next war as you're fighting the first war, this type of thing, this shouldn't actually meaningfully slow you down. You don't use diplomats in progress when you're generating a CB, as far as I remember, and so this isn't going to be too big a deal. You don't really care about the creation speed. The spy network construction, not that big a factor, because there are other percentage modifiers for it. I think this gets diluted out, and just more diplomats is like a solution for this, or using your diplomats in this way. The diplomatic reputation is going to make it so that you eat more antagonism. So this is going to be a factor. It also affects other things like how willing people are to accept things, what your max trust looks like, these types of things. And so diplomatic reputation, this malice, is a little bit nasty, but what we get in exchange for all this is war score cost, and this is very polarized how useful this is, because you need to be maxing out how much stuff you're taking in terms of war score for this to be useful. But when you are doing that, this becomes incredibly useful. It's also very useful if you're stacking war score cost modifiers, where it will have increasing marginal return. If you already have 80% war score cost reduction, for example, this will make it, by reducing you from minus 80% to minus 90%, this will make it so you can take twice as much stuff, right? And so, in particular, it's really good in very niche situations, but other than that, Belligerent is going to, in my opinion, look a lot worse than Conciliatory. But I don't think either of these are really that high a priority to push. For Conciliatory, we do have the Casus Belli, creation speed, malice. Don't care too much about it. Diplo rep, we do like that. Loyalty of subjects, actually a pretty nice modifier to be getting, but it's going to be usually 10. 10 will sometimes move the needle. It's a nice modifier. We're happy to receive it. The efficiency of cabinet will often get diluted. You'll have plus 150, plus 200% cabinet efficiency, and so an additional 10% really isn't going to move the needle too much in terms of how useful your cabinet is, but it's really going to be the Diplo rep and the loyalty of subjects we care about, and this is going to be nicer because you're going to be generating less antagonism because you have more Diplo rep. So if you are maxing out every war and taking the absolute max war score, Belligerent might be better, but if you are not doing that, Conciliatory is going to be better, right? Because you're generating less antagonism per war. Also, if you're fighting small ball wars, getting in and then getting out very quickly, just winning a couple battles, piecing them out before 100%, this type of thing, and looking for volume rather than just one mega huge war, I think Conciliatory also starts to look a little bit better. I think this is generally a better way of fighting wars in the early game. Maybe it's a little bit worse in the late game, but jumping into the browser here, we are going to throw these up on our rankings, and we are going to put into a C tier, Belligerent with a really heavy-handed asterisk, which is that it's like Uber S tier if you're like trying to world conquest, right? It's like, but in a lot of situations, I think it's just not very good. And so we're going to have it down in C tier, very, very polarized, and much more medium type of value. We are going to have Conciliatory. If you're engaging in a lot of wars and you're really kind of proactively managing antagonism and this type of stuff, it probably belongs up here. If you're not that proactive, maybe it's like down here, this type of thing. It's got some level of variance. Why don't we put it... Why don't we put it here? Well, no, it's just that I think it's quite a bit better than Belligerent, but honestly, I think the thing is pushing either of these is not really too high a priority, is the thing. I think that the opportunity cost is generally not that high, but the tools you have are not that huge. You generally get a small trend, and it's very often in parliaments when you have the option to push one of these, you don't care about pushing them as much as you do just the support, and so you end up pushing it in both directions, and you're kind of a little bit whatever about it, and it generally kind of settles close to where your trend is, whatever that might be. I mean, I do think Conciliatory is better in most situations, but this has, Belligerent has considerably more top end. Alright, this next one I might catch a little bit of flack for, but we are going to talk about quality versus quantity, and I think that quantity is just much, much stronger than quality. So let's get into it. First of all, for quality, you do have increased army maintenance. Don't like that. That means that you can have fewer troops, per cost, but if you're throttled by ducats, this is going to be a problem. If you're throttled by manpower, not so much a problem. It's also going to give additional army morale recovery speed. This allows you to effectively maneuver around better because you don't need to get more morale recovery, but for the most part, you're going to be throwing your troops in when they're high morale. Military tactics is quite useful. This will decrease the amount of damage that you take from combat. And so this is going to be quite strong. I do not know how all of these damage reduction modifiers stack. I think they stack multiplicatively. It feels like they stack multiplicatively. If they stack additively, stacking an enormous amount of these is incredibly strong, but I don't think that's how they stack. And then you have this 25% army initiative. Now, initiative is quite strong. However, if we take a look at quality, or quantity rather, we will see that we have a malice to initiative. Oh no! So the way that this works is we will have less initiative. However, we have plus 25% frontage. Generally speaking, the way to use armies seems to be very death ballish because battles finish very quickly, very, very quickly. I know they're going to get slower in the future by the release, but right now they resolve very quickly, so you effectively don't have time to reinforce. So having these big fat death stacks is really important, and eventually you overcome kind of your natural frontage very, very quickly. And what happens is the amount of regiments that you can roll to enter to engage, to move from the box, like this box here, to being in battle is equal to your frontage. You can see here we have 8 out of 10 frontage. So if we had 12 frontage, we could roll 12 regiments to engage. And we would have a lot more regiments because we would raise conscripts at this point. So we would have way over 12. And the way the math works is like if you have plus 50% initiative or something like this, and you roll in order to, and you get plus 25% frontage when you have 0, this modifier, and minus 25% initiative, it's something like 97% relative to baseline, no initiative, malice, no frontage in terms of how many people you're going to get engaged. Right now, it will take longer for you to fill your front, but because you're rolling more guys into the front, you're going to be able to engage quickly anyways. And so this malice to initiative is not as bad as it looks at first blush. And also, we have army maintenance discount. Happy to see that. Minus food unit consumption, kind of a bit more of effect in the late game. We're starting to see this actually be important, but the frontage is a very hard modifier to get. And once we're engaged, if we have 25% more frontage, that just means we deal 25% more damage, right? As long as we have enough troops to get in, this is going to really, really impact things, and it gives us effectively more surface area to bring more stats to bear upon our opponent. So our opponent might have a little bit more tactics, but if they take 10% less damage from tactics, right, and we're dealing 25% more damage, then we're easily overcoming that. And so I do think frontage is, in particular, just a really strong modifier. Also, it's way easier to get tactics than it is to get frontage. Actually, it's not that easy to get tactics, but frontage is a very, very rare modifier, and so it is hard to achieve. But on the initiative front, speaking of frontage, it's actually really easy to get an initiative modifier, because if we take a look here, and we take a look what we'll get from generals, this is one of the few sources of frontage. There's like another 10% in the tree. I think if you go military focus, there might be a couple more in the tree, if you go military focus, but military focus generally kind of, I think, is worse than the admin or diplo, but you can get up to 10% here. You get, equal to your diplomacy, that amount of percent of your general on initiative. And so the more initiative modifiers you have, the less valuable or the less damaging an initiative bonus or malice is, just in terms of how the math works. And so you are going to not have difficulty engaging anyways, and in fact you are going to be better at getting troops engaged with the additional frontage, and you're going to bring more stats to bear. And so as it relates to just having as hard to beat an army as possible, the fact that you want a death stack rather than maneuver around these little armies, the fact that you are getting units in faster to bring stats to bear faster, all of this kind of combined makes it so that I do think quantity is quite a bit better than quality as it relates to being able to have a bigger army. But also, army maintenance is just kind of nice in general. Like this as an economic modifier, this means you could have a bigger standing army just sitting around to increase loyalty of subjects or relative power of subjects compared to you, this type of thing. I do think that there is some opportunity cost in the sense that there is a privilege like as 5% discipline that you need 50 quality to be able to go, or sorry, government reform. But if your reform slots are pressured at all, then this is not a consideration, right? If 5% discipline is not worth a reform slot to you, then this is not a consideration. The tactics are good. Maybe I'm not understanding the math fully on stacking as much tactics and discipline and all these as possible. I think they affect multiplicatively. I don't think you can stack enough so that it overcomes the effective bonus that you're getting from frontage, especially when taking into consideration that your opponent's also stacking tactics and discipline and this type of stuff when they go quantity. So let's jump in and put it into the browser. And just a little bit of an asterisk here is that, okay, here's the secondary question. How much do we value being better at winning battles? And generally speaking, I think it's just about having a bigger stick, having more pops, having more regiments, this type of thing. And so it isn't the be-all, end-all for when it comes to winning battles. So overall, I don't think the combination of these is that high, but to the extent that we're looking at them relatively speaking to each other, I think in D tier belongs quality, and in B tier belongs quantity, something like this. And if you think these are way more important, winning battles is way more important, these types of things, then you would move both of these up in tandem. Because quality, I think, is still useful for winning battles, you'd maybe move this up to C tier and this up to A tier, something like this, if you thought that they were more valuable. But I do think quantity is quite a bit better. I haven't been in my runs very proactive about pushing either quality or quantity. I think that, generally speaking, it's a little bit more expensive to push quantity because there are some good things that give quality anyways, and I'm not sure entirely if it's worth it. But it's something I've been meaning to take a closer look at. But as far as like looking at the math, looking at the stats, looking at this type of stuff, I do think frontage is a rare modifier. 25% is a lot of it. And so this is basically why quantity is going to be better by a big margin here. Next up, we have offense and defense, and this one's a little bit weird because I think it's dramatically different in terms of how this is getting in terms of single-player treatment versus a multiplayer treatment. But jumping into it, offense is going to give you additional army movement speed. Really, I think that this is extremely strong in the early game, and it's going to be strong when there aren't a lot of forts. I think deleting all your forts is really good in the opening for economic reasons, and then building a bunch of forts back up later is going to be quite strong. And so to the extent that the early game is a lot of fortless kind of running around, 10% movement speed is going to be quite valuable, but then it's going to somewhat be a dead modifier later. We have this minus 50% fort defense. Right now, I think assaulting is relatively cheap, so fort defense as a modifier seems not that good. I think it's going to get stronger. I think that the entire analysis of offense and defense is going to be super up in the air based on balance changes that are going to happen in the next few weeks. And so it is difficult to evaluate, but the real big things that I think are useful are the assault ability, and to a lesser extent the siege ability, but just letting you assault in a better sort of fashion. This is a really rare or relatively rare modifier. And so for single player, I think that this is really useful because you outmaneuvering the AI, assaulting in places, and this type of stuff, and fading, like retribution, this type of thing, is going to be easier to do, easier to outmaneuver. Your fortifications are going to be safer from them, and you can use them more as a lever and be where they aren't in a way that is going to be easier to outmaneuver than a human opponent. You're also going to get less antagonism for declaring war without a CB. I don't think you should be doing this anyways, though, so not sure how valuable we consider that. If you're doing a lot of it, though, I mean, I guess you can do this. Less of a stab hit is going to be quite nice. And then in conciliatory, in defensive, we will have modifiers that I think scale better in multiplayer. You have this decreased army movement speed, so this also could be a phasic thing where the early game you value offense and then late game you value defense. Increased fort defense. Now, in general, my perception is that assaulting forts is a little bit cheap, and so that increased fort defense is maybe not as good good a modifier as you'd like it to be for being able to maintain control of an area, especially cheap with like levies and this type of stuff. I think that you should have to get a breach, or it should be extraordinarily costly in the fort assaults. And as it stands, you can assault an unbreached fort, and if it required a breach, then fort defense would start to look a lot better as a modifier. But in PvP, combat speed is actually a decent modifier. It's not spectacular, but this is actually going to help you win battles. So all things equal, the person with more combat speed will generally be favored in battles. We also have extra fort limit. I don't have that much reps on fort limit. Fort maintenance is kind of nice. I don't think it's that big, ever really that big a portion of your budget, such that this is an insane modifier. But maybe it's the case that you're going over fort limit a lot, and then fortification maintenance cost becomes very valuable. I don't have too many reps with this. This is a brand new type of modifier, and so it is a bit difficult for me to evaluate how good fort limit is. But maybe just having, I think in PvP specifically, having more levers, that is like forts around which to maneuver, is going to be valuable. And having the extra combat speed for winning battles is going to be valuable. And if you're smart about positioning your armies, it's harder to get caught out and chased down and run down, especially as you escape the late game and you're going to have all these forts as levers / defensive kind of areas. And so in general, I do think this is going to scale a lot better in multiplayer than in single player. Just so very briefly, in terms of what we're getting in terms of the combat speed, this is how quickly a unit can move from the reserve to a section of the battle. Now, I think you can overstack, and in PvP you would overstack your front so that you don't, this kind of invalidates combat speed. So even if we have as many levies as possible, let's rebalance. Oh, I guess we have, this is the support units, which is why it's not rebalancing. But if we overstack the front above 10, then we don't need the combat speed, right? But if you're just auto balancing, the combat speed will actually help the guys to fill the frontage or to fill the box faster, and so this will be a useful stat. But let's jump into the browser and put the rankings up. I think that we are going to score it for single player and then just like inverse it for multiplayer is kind of the way I'm looking at it, where we are going to put defensive into D tier. We're going to put it behind quality. I do think quality is a little bit better with the tactics, this type of stuff. Generally speaking, also, I think that this may be a bias of mine in that the military things I'm just not ranking that high, because I think that the bigger thing is having more pops, having a bigger stick, having a bigger economy tends to be more important. Bringing a bigger stick to the stick fight is going to be more valuable than having the nicer looking stick, although it's always nice to have a good looking stick. And then for offensive, we are going to put this into C tier. And just in multiplayer, just consider these two probably reversed in terms of usefulness, because well, actually, maybe being able to assault down the forts is still going to be really good. I think that the assault thing is going to get nerfed, though. Assault's not going to be as good, and defensive, in that case, is going to maybe creep up into kind of upper edges of C tier, something like this. But for now, we'll keep it right there for those two ratings. A brief note regarding militaries is, I think in the early game especially, like Aristocracy just giving you more, noble levies is also just going to like have a bigger impact than most of these other values will, specifically when you're relying on levies. Let's talk about two of the very best values in the game, land and naval. So, in particular, the RGO size, it is nice, but it isn't really the big writing home point. There's a lot of percentage RGO max size in the tree, so that you'll be getting like plus 100% anyways. If you have a player who's rural, it gets plus 100%, and so 5% is not necessarily that big a difference. You'd much rather have RGO output than this IRGO max size. You also have proximity cost through land, and this is the main idea here. Now, there's a lot of countries that can get a lot of reductions, proximity cost reductions, and for these countries, it gets increasingly valuable the more of these you have, just because of how the math works. It's a discount modifier. When you are at 50% reduction already, an additional 10% represents a 20% decrease in the amount you're paying, but when you are at a zero reduction, 10% represents 10% reduction, right? Just in terms of how the math is working. And so for the countries that have this really high top end, it is going to be really nice. And we're thinking countries like Russia, countries like the Ottomans to some extent, although going naval on the Ottomans also makes some sense. These are going to be very, very strong. the proximity cost reduction. And it is going to have a really, really high top end for the few countries that can get to minus 100% proximity cost reduction. Although those might be getting nerfed before release. We are recording this on the influencer build that's like 2 weeks before release. I don't know if this stuff gets nerfed. I don't know if some of it's already been nerfed. And it's impossible to get this minus 100% proximity cost reduction. But to the extent that it is possible, land value is going to help get you there, and it is going to be quite strong on anyone who's very land-oriented anyways, and so I think it's probably going to be good on stuff like France, Hungary, these types of countries. I also think that potentially land value is really good early on, and then it kind of falls off a little bit later relative to naval as a result of this trade range business. And so there's trade range modifiers in the tech tree, not a ton, but generally speaking, just in terms of how things work, eventually most of the range that you are using in trade is traveling through the sea. Pretty much no matter who you're playing. And this 50% additional trade range used, kind of a nasty modifier. Even if you have minus 50% already, if you compare it, where if you have zero trend towards anything and you have minus 50% cost, you're paying 50%. And then if you have this plus 50% relative to that, you will still be paying twice as much as you would have for trade in terms of the range used. And so your trade capacity goes a lot less far. I think this is actually kind of nasty. But proximity cost reduction is also really, really valuable. So rating this is a little bit difficult. I probably need to take a closer look at this, just in general. But this proximity cost land through land is going to be really, really good if you're like landlocked, because a lot of the range you have to use for trade anyways is going to have to move through land anyways, and you will get a little bit of a discount going through land. So stuff like Bohemia, these types of countries. Coming on over to naval, first of all, it is harder to push naval. Generally speaking, you are going to have to sink like a government reform slot to be able to push naval that successfully. And also, if you go navally oriented, it often pressures your government reforms just in general. But what we're going to get here is 30% maritime presence. There are other sources of maritime presence, so this is effectively diluted, but there's not a ton. And what a flat -1 proximity cost through maritime. Now, if you have zero maritime presence, it's going to cost base 30 to travel through a sea zone that can be reduced to 0 if you have maritime presence. And it will cost, in addition to that, 5 proximity cost, and this can be reduced by flat modifiers such as this. I believe there's one here. I believe there's half a point in age 4, and I think there's an event that gives -1 in the last stage. And so for most countries, you can reduce the cost from, talking from the perspective of age 4, you can reduce the cost from 4.5 to 3.5, which involves like a 33% reduction. But for the most part, you're also going to be, when you're pushing stuff through naval, you're also going to be traveling a lot through these land provinces, so it won't just be like a 33% reduction, and a land reduction is going to be much more consistent. So for example, if we're doing proximity and we're going over to like, all the way over here, let's say, the way it would work is we would go out to sea, go through a few provinces, and then come here, and most of our proximity expenditure would actually be in the land, approaching the sea, and then going through the sea zone. So evaluating it's a lot of difficulty because the sea zones are generally out of the way, they're not exactly where you want them, and the land like zones move exactly in the direction you want them. You can push them like 360 degrees. They don't require you be by the coast, all this type of stuff. But pushing stuff navally is going to be stronger for most of the game up until railroads, just generally speaking, and this helps for that, but often when you're pushing stuff navally, you still have to push it through land. So hard to evaluate. Generally speaking, I think the proximity cost through maritime is going to have a higher floor relative to the proximity cost through land, and also a lower ceiling, and it's going to have a higher floor when you can like reasonably push stuff through naval. Obviously, if you're landlocked, it's useless. But the trade range used over land versus sea, I think the trade range used over sea modifier is going to be much better, especially because there are other trade range used modifiers. And so if you get enough of these minus modifiers, I haven't specifically tried to stack this very, very aggressively, but I think they really start to make it very, very cheap to move goods. and that this is really, really valuable. And so this is a difficult thing to kind of fully evaluate. But on the countries where naval is good, it's just like absolutely insane. Overall, not just because of the proximity cost reduction, although that is quite strong, it doesn't have as much top end as the land reduction, when the land one is really, really good, because that's reducing you to zero cost through land. But the trade as well is also going to be very strong. I do need to take a closer look at this, I think, to fully appreciate it and compare when we have this versus when we don't. But we have noticed when playing these maritime nations that we're pushing naval and we're getting these trade modifiers, just being able to produce or push enormous volumes of goods relative to like these landlocked countries where we're pushing land, it's just not feeling really quite the same. So jumping into the ratings, we are going to be moving up and putting, first of all, the land value is going to be going into A tier. It is still extremely, extremely, extremely strong, despite the I think, effect where it is reducing the trade. I think the trade reduction in particular is very, very punishing on land, though, but the proximity cost reduction. And then we are going to, maybe slightly controversial, S tier on the naval, largely because both the modifiers are really good, whereas the land one is just the proximity one. If you're just rating the proximity modifier alone, it would look something more like this, but I think the proximity and the trade in conjunction probably makes it look a little bit more like this. And whichever one you are going to go for, whether it's land or naval, and naval is harder to push, admittedly, you are going to want to push it towards 100, I think. I don't think you want half measures in this regard, unless you really, really hate the trade, like, range modifier, but at which point you would just rather be zeroed out. Which I don't think is the case for land, but, like, I guess in theory that could be the case. But yeah, this is the way we're going to throw it up, with just, like, a heavy-handed asterisk that land versus naval, probably country to country, is going to have the highest variance in terms of which one's good. Like, if you're Bohemia, you're going to go land, right? And if you're England, you're going to go naval. And so your geographical start is also going to heavily inform which of these you go, and they're both good. So they're both going to be, whichever one you decide, it's going to be really worth pushing it in that direction. Alright, next up, we're going to look at capital economy versus traditional economy. This one is going to be very phasic in nature. I think for most runs, you are going to want to go traditional economy first, or stay traditional economy, and then transition to capital economy later. Specifically, as you unlock workshops is going to be the turning point as both nations. And so we'll start with traditional economy. We'll start with the right side instead of the left side. You will get increased building cost, and here's that modifier, plus 20% raw materials output. Now, in the early game, you won't have a bunch of percentage modifiers on stuff like iron yet, or any other, RGO output. So this will represent a 20% increase in the loud cars outside, but also 20% increase in the raw material output that you're putting out. And this will be a large portion of a lot of people's economies. If you have gold and silver, this gets even stronger or more pronounced an effect, and is definitely going to be useful. You also have this population capacity plus 25%. Now, to be fair, there's a lot of other modifiers that you can get on population capacity. So taking a look at here, we can see the pop capacity of this location. We're getting this flat 100k, another flat 5k, and then we have around 150% in terms of percentage modifiers. So this plus 25% isn't a pure plus 25%. In the instance we showed, it would be like another like 16% or something like this. But this additional population capacity will help with population growth. And also, if you are playing a country where you are at pop cap, like the Mamluks do or are kind of at the start of the game, or a country like India, actually having more cap just straight up means more pops, because you will be able to push more population. You will actually be able to benefit from population growth for some more time, and this is really, really valuable. So to the countries, or for the countries that don't want to get off a traditional economy early, or maybe want to stay on it, I think a lot of those countries are going to be the ones that have enormous pops anyways, because some of the benefits you get from capital economy, you just get from having more pops, which is additional production efficiency. We also see 20% food production. There's a lot of this modifier kicking around, a lot of it in trees, a lot of it in trees. You know, apples do grow on trees, and that is a picture of an apple, but a lot of it is in the tech tree. You get a lot of it from buildings. You won't have a lot of it at the start of the game, though. But once you start to stack a lot of this percentage modifier, this effectively gets diluted out in its usefulness. Also, notably, there's a lot of building cost discount modifiers. The more of these you stack, the better. And so if you already have minus 60% building cost reduction, then you... getting this in addition to that, right, and moving from 40% cost to 50% cost, it's actually increasing the price you're paying for buildings by 25%. But also notably, you just build more RGOs. RGOs are a little bit more efficient, and then once all the RGOs are fully expanded, then you start running the building discount in terms of gameplay, and you starting with traditional economy and transitioning to capital economy, which gives a discount to building cost reduction minus food production. So this modifier early is actually a little bit annoying, and if you're Italy and you like push capital economy at the start, or you're like Venice and you start with capital economy and you conquer all of Italy, and you don't proactively take care of food, you're actually going to probably have enormous food issues. It gives you minus bank interest, which is whatever, because loans are really bad anyways at this juncture. From the crown power malice, they're just not worth taking, so you don't want to have them. We could even show that just real quick, because I do think it's like substantive enough for you to like really just like understand how important it is to avoid this. But if we take a look here and we look at some of these modifiers, do we actually have to wait a month in order to get the current debt minus 13% crown power? And so this is pretty nasty in terms of what we are getting off of these 7 loans. We're getting the 13% crown power. We want to avoid that, and so you are also going to be getting, and this is the creme de la creme, 20% production efficiency. Now, more pops give you more building levels, and more building levels give you more economies of scale, which give you production efficiency, but nowhere near this amount on the margin of having more pops. But this is going to be really, really good early, and then it's going to kind of get diluted because eventually you are getting a lot more levels and this type of stuff. And so it's kind of awkward that it's really good early, or there's going to be a phase in the maybe middling portions of the game, like ages maybe 3 to 4, where this production efficiency is a huge share of your production efficiency. But then as you get to like the later portions of the game, it is going to fall off, and maybe there's even an argument to like rebounding into traditional economy for like the pop capacity and the RGO output, something a little bit weird like that. But production efficiency is going to be really good, and it's just better than it looks. And to just briefly explain kind of why that is, it's a straight up output modifier. It's not a throughput modifier, it's an output modifier. And so taking a look here, we have 0.82 output, and we have basically no production efficiency modifiers. We have this 0.5, 1.0, this type of thing. And so what it's going to happen is our production efficiency overall is 1%, right? And so our input goods cost, what is this? We'll call it 4. Our outputs are 5.6. Our margin is 1.7, okay? With our outputs, if we got 20% production efficiency, this would just increase our outputs by 20%. It would increase our income by 20%, and let's call that an extra 1.1 ducat. That would move our profit from 1.7 to 2.9, right? Or 2.8, which is a huge jump that is much bigger than 20% because it's operating on the margin. And so production efficiency is really, really valuable because it increases output, not throughput. And so it is going to be very strong. And so for that reason, let's jump into the browser and kind of put these up here. We are going to put both of these particularly high. I do think you want to go out of your way when you're on traditional economy to stay on 100 traditional economy. And then after that, you're going to want to push production efficiency as much as possible. We are going to be putting this just behind Aristocracy here in terms of traditional economy. Do think that the bonuses overall are very, very strong. And then for capital economy, we are going to be putting that into A tier. And so that will be how we kind of ship it out. Whatever it is, you do want to kind of value pushing it towards 100, and you don't want to leave it or sacrifice trajectory towards it in this middling sort of way. All right, next up, we have our first tech tree value, which is going to be outward or inward. It is unlocked in age 3. Just a reminder, for all of these tech tree ones, we are only considering them from the perspective of the portion of the game they are in. So we are not evaluating outward and inward based on how good it would be in ages 1 or 2, because it's not available there. Now, first up, we have cultural tradition. Generally speaking, it's kind of a little bit of a dead modifier. This is your defense on culture. It makes it so it's harder to integrate your cores or restore your territory, makes it so it's harder to annex you, these types of things. But if you're on the back foot in that, the run is probably scuffed anyways, and so it's really not going to be that big an impact. For multiplayer, or for single player as well, but it does increase your counter-espionage, and that might be the one kind of instance where it's really useful, but not really going to be that big a factor. Power projection affects who you can build overseas buildings in, and how quick your colonization is. These are the main two things. It also affects the amount of stability cost of declaring war on people and war exhaustion. It's kind of like a little bit of a lesser effect, but these aren't the big ones. The big ones are, in my opinion, the colonization. Also decreases antagonism generated from language. I do believe that this is the antagonism you generate as a result of language, not how much is generated on you when someone else does something. So I do think that this is a nice modifier. Diplo cap, generally not that pressured a resource on the current balance, but there are types of balances where this is a very pressured resource, and this would allow you to maintain a lot more colonies, maintain a lot more subjects, and be quite a useful modifier. And so there are contexts where this would be useful, but I think the big one is the monthly colonial migration. Really allows you to colonize faster, makes your colonization way more efficient, but it is very hard to push either outward or inward. And as a consequence, I think you kind of just push it with your cab action and you let it sit at 20 or 30 in whichever direction you wanted to move it towards. And in particular, inward is generally speaking going to be easier to push, or there's stuff you want anyways that pushes you 0.1 towards inward. And so, okay, inward gives you 25% crown power. Now, we were really pleased with the crown power from Centralization, but that's because it's better earlier on. We start to get more and more crown power modifiers, it dilutes the power of them, but this is still the nice aspect of it, and to the extent you would want to go inward, it would be for this. So if you're doing zero colonization, probably prefer inward, just generally speaking, so it's going to affect your run a little bit. You also get monthly control plus a 0.5. Now, I don't know if this overcomes decay to completely delete decay. We haven't tested that out. What inward used to give was just a flat control. Now it gives monthly control. If it deletes decay, which it might, I haven't tested this, this might be insane because you can just push up control in all of your locations with the cabinet action, and then if you're getting plus 0.5 and the decay is 0.5, it never goes down, because that's how math works. I'm not sure if this is the case. I hope that this isn't the case. If this is the case, inward is just clearly insane as a value and is like S tier, right? We are going to assume this is not the case, but just want to make it clear that it might operate in this way, in which case it's probably an oversight and kind of a funny one, and you would want to push inward super, super hard, but it would only ever be extremely useful once you get or approach the point where you have no decay. That said, it's not going to be necessarily that strong a modifier otherwise. Also, the cabinet action is just silly. The increased control cabinet action is really more the problem than this. We see increased antagonism from language influence. I do believe that this is going to antagonism towards others is kind of weirdly worded. I'm not 100% sure. I do think that this decreases your antagonism on you, but I'm not 100% sure. I haven't specifically looked at this modifier. I do think the language influence is not the biggest source of antagonism anyways, though, because it's segmented based on a bunch of different things. And then also, we have monthly colonial migration minus 50%. So this is going to make a huge difference in your colonization speed. Generally speaking, we think outward, or I think outward is going to be a little bit better. Let's jump into the rankings here and pull these up. Outward is going to be the one where you're sending the letter, and we're going to put it a little bit behind here. I don't think it's super, super high priority. And then inward, we are going to put, that's not inward, this is inward. We are going to put this behind quality, with a really heavy-handed asterisk regarding the monthly control bit. I do need to test that. If the monthly control works in that way, it's probably A or S tier. and is a very, very abusable game planner, and I would consider it an exploit to use those two in conjunction, because I think that's really silly, and so I kind of don't want to put it up here just because of that. And so because of that, I'm going to put it where we think that monthly control is kind of a weak modifier, because outside of that one particular cabinet action, it is a relatively weak modifier. Let's maybe show very quickly what we mean by this in game here, and because it might be hard to like illustrate or fully gather what's going on, we're going to assign a cabinet, and we're going to assign the action increase province control, right? And then we don't really need someone in charge, but let's put someone in charge, because it's always good to have someone in charge. And what this is going to do is, currently it was at its previous max control level, and the max control level here is going to be current control 76, max is 89. So it's moved up the max control, and what it's going to do is it's going to, we're going to have some decay or trend, and you can see here, we are not losing any, we're not decaying any, and it's going to move up towards this value. So a couple months pass, it's going to go to 80, it's going to go higher, it's going to go higher, etc. Let's get it up to 82 before we kind of show what we're beating, and then we are going to pull this off. Right, we're just going to change him to change the society values centralization, sure. And now, the maximum control is going to drop below what it was before, right? It's now going to be, our current control is 85, and the monthly change is minus 0.5. The base value for every country is minus 0.5, right? What we are saying is if this gets completely invalidated, right, by the inward value, then we could just keep it at 85 control for forever. At which point, it's just plus 30 or 40 control everywhere, right? This is obscene and silly and nonsense, but this would be how it works. As it stands right now, the cabinet action is really good anyways, because when we're increasing the control, right, we are increasing it at a rate that is like 5 times the decay, so in theory you can kind of add 20 to 30 control to 5 different provinces with this cabinet action. But with inward, this would be pushed up even more, right? If it is going to stack in this way where it invalidates this monthly change, or even decreases it. If you cut it by, if you get 50 inward, this means you could rotate around twice as many provinces. It's just a whole lot of micro, but this is what we're referring to with that play pattern in particular. Next up in Age 4, we do have the Age of Reformation, and we have Mercantilism and Free Trade here. Now, generally speaking, I think both of these are relatively weak, but let's jump into them. Trade maintenance, minus 10%. There are a few sources of this. You can get the maintenance really, really low. This lets you move more goods. Generally speaking, maintenance is not going to be that large relative to your margins in terms of how things shake out, but as you really push the economy more and more and more, and trade values start to go down in terms of how much you're getting per trade, this starts to have a bit of an effect. There are a lot of sources of trade maintenance. You can reduce it really low. You might even be able to reduce it to 0. I don't know if you could reduce it to negative. If you can reduce it to negative, that's a little bit absurd, but overall it's just not that strong a modifier, because when it is a strong modifier is when you're on a per ducat basis or a per building slot basis, your trade isn't going to be that valuable anyways, and so you're making something that's not very valuable more valuable. You also have this trade efficiency malice, kind of a little bit annoying. What is going to happen is, it's going to be a decrease in the amount of money you're making. I think it operates after the margin is calculated, if I recall correctly in the math, which makes it not like super nasty. And the way that production efficiency is really insane, because your 20% production efficiency, as we saw with the example, gets to like 70% increase in money. That doesn't happen here, as far as I understand the math, where it is calculating it after the margin has been applied, like after the difference between the value of the good in market A versus market B has already been subtracted, then it is applied. So it's not applying at a marginal or on a marginal calculation, it's applying at a net calculation, and so it is going to be 2.5%, so it's going to be a decrease in trade income, but it's not huge. Overall, I think trade efficiency is just a spectacularly weak modifier compared to tax efficiency. But also, we will have market protection. This makes it so markets you own will just tend to be bigger, or locations you own will tend to join markets you own. This is probably net net a strong modifier, although sometimes you just prefer the market access, and this might actually be bad. And so, okay. It will also get increased export cost market from foreign traders. This is kind of a whatever modifier, as long as you're controlling the market, which you should be able to control markets where you control the market center. You will be controlling all the most favorable export trades anyways if you have enough trade capacity, and if you don't really care as much if people are benefiting from it. So I really do think that this is kind of a modifier that is intriguing, but doesn't really move the needle in practice. And so overall, I think it's just a little bit weak and perhaps even bad, just because the positive modifiers don't necessarily override the trade efficiency. I think it's kind of a little bit of a wash just overall, but it's potentially going to be negative. And then next up we have a free trade, which gives 20% trade advantage. I generally think trade advantage as a modifier is a little bit weak, because, so here's the way it works, is whoever has the most trade advantage in the market gets to decide the outgoing trades first, and this is a valuable thing. However, this is a thing where either you ladder, that is you get one step ahead of the next person in the market, or you don't. And so if we take a look at this market here, right, and we see that we have the Mamluks, we have trade advantage of 40, and then we have Barca as the next person with trade advantage of 6. 20% trade advantage isn't going to do anything for Barca because they're not going to ladder us as the Mamluks. And similarly, 20% isn't going to do anything for us because we're already at the top of the heap. So I think it is very rare that 20% allows you to move one up. And in fact, if we take a look here, there's one instance in which it maybe makes you notch one person, which is if Genoa had 20% more trade advantage, maybe, right? Or actually 0.24 times, yeah, if Genoa had 20% trade advantage, they would get to move ahead of Venice in the scrum and get to trade before Venice. But other than that, that wouldn't move the needle for any of these guys. And I think this is the case with most markets and most situations where trade advantage just generally isn't going to allow you to ladder people and gain access to the trades you would otherwise not have access to. So generally, I think it's a weak modifier. Trade efficiency is nice. You get, that amount more trade income, this type of thing. It's split with the estates, so you're not actually making you're making 2.5% more on whatever you're making, but you don't get the entirety of it yourself. And then we have minus market protection. This means you'll have more market access, so I think in theory you actually probably slightly prefer a negative market protection to this, just because having more market access is maybe more valuable than having more locations in your market, but it really depends on the type of location. Like in particular, if we're thinking coming over here, we like the market protection as Castile on these lumber provinces, because we don't really care about how much money we're making from the lumber. We don't care that the market access is going to be low here in the Burgo market, where it's 53%, so we're only getting 53% of the tax base. That's not what's important. What's important to us is that the lumber is in this market, and so it's actually a little bit annoying that this lumber is in the Barcelona market, even if we're gonna have better market access there, because we don't care about how much we're getting from the tax base. We care about having the thing in our market, but for a lot of other things, we would actually just care how much it's going to the tax base, and so it is a little bit of a mixed bag in regards to how that modifier is going to overall feel or be, this type of thing, but okay. We will also have additional burgers trades capacity. This is really difficult to evaluate because the burger trades are opaque. You can't just look at all the burger trades in isolation. Some of them are kind of actively annoying and bad, like when they trade away your lumber and you're trying to collapse the price. I think overall they're good. I think that they might not be applying income to the burgers correctly right now anyways. And if the burgers were making way more money and we're building way more buildings, this is something that would be quite valuable. And I think that they're currently not getting the money they're supposed to off their trades anyways, in which case their trades are annoying. But if they're making a bunch of money off their trades, then their trades start to look a whole lot better. This is difficult to evaluate. I do think it's probably good, but the burgers are also kind of annoying sometimes. So coming into the browser, we are going to throw these up. And just generally speaking, they're not going to be that great. We are going to throw Mercantilism all the way in back, and then we're going to throw free trade just behind here. Just a little bit ahead, with a really heavy-handed asterisk that if the burgers are currently not making the money they're supposed to be making, and they're supposed to be making a lot more from trade. And if we can understand how this is working better, and like their income is not what it should be, and it should be just way higher, this type of thing, maybe this is somewhere in here. A little bit difficult to evaluate, because I think that it's kind of like bugged right now, but as it stands with the way it is right now, they don't really seem to generate a lot of money off of it anyways. To be fair, they're doing a lot of like the least profitable trades go to the burghers. You get priority, you get the first crack at it, and I do believe everyone in the market gets the first crack at it. So the most profitable trades are generally going to the nations, but it could be the case that their income is underreported because they're laundering money from the state and keeping it a secret, in which case it should be a little bit higher than it currently looks like it is. Whoopsie, we accidentally forgot about individualism and communalism here. So for these, I do think that in general, whatever your trend is, you kind of just go with that, and it's not that big a deal, and sometimes you push it and sometimes you don't, but you don't really play around it too much. But also that communalism tends to be stronger in the early game, and individualism tends to be stronger in the later game. So let's jump into that. In particular, estate satisfaction equilibrium is a nasty modifier. Very often you want to keep your estates a certain level of satisfaction so you can tax them as much as possible and stay above 50%. Although you can look to push other thresholds based on a variety of factors, this type of thing. As their satisfaction gets lower, they build more trash stuff, and as their satisfaction gets lower, it's easier for them to join revolts. You don't want to get revolts because they kill your prosperity and a whole bunch of other things, and so you want the satisfaction so you can be able to tax people. If you have the max tax available, satisfaction effectively equals more taxes. And so if that is the case for you in a category and you're getting this estate satisfaction equilibrium malice, that's real bad. In addition to whatever bonuses you can get from the estates being happy, right? You do get 10% army morale and navy morale off of this. This is not like a nothing modifier. And you get the pop migration speed. Pop migration speed, I think, is better in the later portions of the game when you have like urban centers and rural centers, and in particular, you are out of burghers in your urban centers, and you have plenty of pop in your rural areas, at which point I do think that this modifier is pretty good. It's also maybe good if you're really kind of sculpting stuff around with the cabinet action for moving pops, although that's kind of difficult to evaluate. I don't think that's necessarily a strong play pattern, but maybe it's okay. A lot of the cabinet actions have been nerfed over the course of development. A lot of them have gotten a lot worse, and so maybe using migration edict is generally good, and this would improve that in terms of whatever that play pattern looks like. And so in the early game, you will have less sources of estate satisfaction equilibrium, and I think often this will throttle your ability to tax people, especially as you're trying to hand out privileges. Taking a look at communalism here, though, we have this minus 50% revoked privilege cost. This is kind of polarized how good this is, right? Because if you aren't revoking any privileges, this is a dead modifier. In particular, you can roll parliamentary debate, I think, which gives you minus 15% cost. So stacking that with this would give you minus 65% cost, right? And so that would make it possible, as countries with like us, where we have banal lordship was particularly nasty, to bring this down by 2/3, right? So bringing it down from 180 to 60 makes it much more manageable, although we would rather push plutocracy rather than communalism, I think, to be able to get rid of this. This is like a bit of a struggle here, but the thing is, with the cheaper ones, you only really pay it once, and so that would save us 10 stab once on pulling this out, right? And so that would be nice, but it's not necessarily moving the needle all that much. What we do really like, though, is the constant 2.5% estate satisfaction equilibrium, but this 50% reduction is more impactful to us, I think, than the like 50% gain is, just in terms of like the overall field of the game, because this, with individualism, we will be moving pops 3 times as fast as we will with communalism, plus 100%, plus 100 versus minus 100, right? In terms of the things. And so I do think that this is a little bit annoying. Pop join rebel threshold, minus 5%. That's actually pretty nice. That, in addition to a state satisfaction equilibrium, makes it so you can overtax people if you want, and they won't get as upset, and you won't have to face the rebel stuff. You'll just have to face more of the trash buildings, and okay, it's not that necessarily big a deal, and so maybe this also just promotes a play pattern where you just tax them as much as possible anyways, because you have communalism. I might be underestimating the value of communalism to some regard, regarding some of these play patterns as it relates to overtaxing people, and I might be underestimating individualism in regards to the migration speed, because this is kind of hard to evaluate, and also migration works in a really funky way right now where all the pops just stream into the capital, and to some extent it might even be a bad thing and the capital just gets uber overpopulated. My understanding is that there's a mechanic where this doesn't happen as much if you overbuild this stuff, in which case maybe you value the migration more. So to come in, though, with those, like, caveats in terms of how I think I might be making mistakes here, we will put individualism, we are going to put it behind mercantilism here, because I think sometimes it's actually just straight up bad, and we're going to put communalism into the back of C tier here. Alright, next up in the age of absolutism, we have absolutism versus liberalism, and I think a little bit of a reminder here is important, because I think both of these would be way better in the early game than they are in the fifth age, right? Because they crown power is going to be a lot stronger in the early game, and also parliament request issue support needed is going to be a lot stronger in the early game, and I think it's just a big point of emphasis. Also, we are not evaluating this in relation to the disaster, crown and court, and whether or not it's a good idea to go for the absolutism path or the liberalism path. We are evaluating which one you just want to the abstract, and so you might go the absolutism path and then push liberalism afterwards in terms of what is actually good. We're just looking at it from that perspective. But okay, with that said, we have absolutism with revoke privilege cost. Now, revoke privilege cost is an okay modifier in the early game. We kind of pointed out some privileges we really don't like. Generally speaking, I think privileges are good. They let you tax pops more. Estate satisfaction is important because it lets you tax more. Just as a fundamental gameplay pattern, I think you really want to be giving out a lot of privileges, and the ones that are spectacularly bad, you've gotten rid of them by age 5 anyways. Like, the ones that are really bad, you go out of your way to get rid of them, and they're just gone by now. So, the discount is, I think, kind of a dead-ish modifier, except for maybe there's some where it's kind of, like, middling bad in the nobility, and it's like, something like this. Or maybe you just have a super, super sticky, like, aristocracy, like you're playing France, and you just can't pull them out because they're all minus a 200% cost, and you can never attack the crown power, or you can never attack the power of the nobles because you can't get enough positive plutocracy trend to push values in that direction. I think France might be a specific example where absolutism is good, like absolutism stacked with communalism combined, really to get that massive 80% reduction, plus the cabinet action gets you to 95% reduction, so that it's virtually free. Something like this, it's maybe going to be the context where this is good, but for the most part I think this is relatively dead. Crown power modifier, plus 100%, that's a lot of percents. By the time you get this, you're probably already going to have a plus a couple 100%, and so it's not like the early game where you have none of these modifiers, and plus 100% is insane. In fact, the only modifiers you have are the negative ones from lack of control, because if you have 50 control, that's minus 50% crown power, right? And so, in that instance, going from 50% to 150%, that's triple the crown power. That's huge. But if you have an area that is like 70 control and you already have plus 200% crown power, going from 270% to 370%, right, that's like a 33% income, not a tripling. Or a 33% increase in crown power, not a tripling. So it's really not going to have as high an impact once you're at this phase of the game. You also have minus 5% estate satisfaction equilibrium. We talked a little bit about this and several others. This is a bad modifier. We don't like it. And we have this minus 5%, 2.5% join rebel threshold. Now, this is for satisfaction. This minus 5% estate satisfaction equilibrium may be worth emphasizing. This is minus 10% satisfaction on all of our pops. So we still have 7.5% easier time joining rebels if you are doing everything else just exactly the same because of the negative satisfaction, right? Maybe a point of emphasis, you will get more rebels on absolutism than you do on liberalism because of the estate satisfaction equilibrium aspect of it. Next up, we have liberalism here, which is going to give you 5% estate satisfaction equilibrium. We love it. It is going to be good. We've kind of talked about it a little bit, why it's already good, so we won't belabor that or repeat it, because we just talked about it, and we never repeat ourselves, because we don't like repeating ourselves, so we don't repeat ourselves. And then also we get this 20% culture's capacity modifier. Generally speaking, culture capacity percent modifier is not the most common modifier, and it is going to allow us to accept more cultures. You can see we don't have a modifier there. And as you accept more cultures, you get more cores. Moving stuff from integrated to core is plus 15 control. So that is quite nice to be able to do that and be able to push more of those. And so we are happy when we can do that with liberalism. But wait, there's more. There's also this increased pop join rebel threshold, which... call an ambulance, but not for us. Call the police for this rebellion. But this is effectively off-put or offset by the fact that you are getting a state satisfaction and equilibrium, and so you're going to net have much fewer rebels to deal with. You also have this minus 10% parliament request issue support needed. This is for these issues here coming into our parliament. And taking a look, doing all of these is going to cost 10% less. Kind of funny on the Mamluk, because that represents a 40% decrease in cost, not a 20% decrease in cost. But with this, it's way better in the early game, because in the early game, clicking these buttons is way more valuable. In the late game, it's going to mean you're getting request additional taxes easier alongside extra CBs easier, but there's other sources of CBs, this type of thing. I don't really think that this is all that valuable, but it is not nothing. It is something that is useful, and it allows you to have more successful parliaments. Maybe you have parliaments where you have 90 worth of total support, and it lets you click a button and then click another button. I do think forced parliament issue, if I recall correctly, if you go absolutism and you go autocratic parliament type, I'm not sure if this requires this. I think it might be a certain level of crown power or absolutism, and you might need to maintain it. But this gives you plus 100% support, so this kind of invalidates this as well in terms of if you the cheaper support. I'm not sure if absolutism grants you this such that it kind of overrides the system. So this is a slightly newer thing, but coming into our rating system, generally speaking, I think absolutism that's not the one. Coming into our system, I think absolutism is, generally speaking, going to be a little bit on the weaker side, and that relative to the liberalism here. We're pulling it up. And we are going to put absolutism into C tier here. And then we are going to put the liberalism just behind humanism. Somewhere in here is probably where this goes. And then that will be a pretty good value to be pushing. And then we have our two values that are culture/situation specific. Alright, so let's start with the Muslim ones, because we're already on the Mamluks, which are going to be, it's generally really hard to generate a trend towards either of these, and for the most part, you're clicking on events to be able to push towards them, and specifically fighting for a positive trend towards jurisprudence, I think is generally worth doing, but maybe not super worth doing. So taking a look, we have Mysticism, which gives clergy a state satisfaction and equilibrium. They both give this. This is nice. It gives you a little bit of extra research speed, lets you tax the clergy a little bit. Or you just go for the research speed on this satisfaction. It gives you 10% army morale, and it gives you 10% pop conversion speed. Now this pop conversion speed can be really, really nice if you are at a point where in an area with low control, because control gives negative conversion speed. And then if you have, or it gives it here, if you have a negative enough control such that it completely bricks you, or if you are at minus 90% in your total modifier, a plus 10% modifier represents doubling your conversion rate. And so I do think that this can be difficult to evaluate how good 10% is, because it's not just you get 10% more conversions. In some instances, it's doubling your conversion, right? But there's other sources of this. There's also sources of flat conversion. A little bit hard to evaluate. I think that sometimes you don't want to convert pops, though, especially if you could take slaves. And so there's some points where, like, conversion's bad, but you can set up your privileges such that it stops conversions. But maybe I'm not properly evaluating this, and this is actually stronger than we think. But generally I think jurisprudence is a little bit better because the efficiency of cabinet and research speed, I think, are a little bit stronger modifiers. Now, the clergy is state satisfaction equilibrium. I believe if they're fully satisfied, they give 25%. So between 50 and 100, they will give plus 25% research speed. So what this represents is an additional 2% research speed, so 12% research speed. This gets diluted out because as you get more and more both literacy and also as you get more institutions, they will give you a ton of percent research speed modifiers, and tech will go up and up in cost. And so this won't necessarily represent way more research, but I do think it's marginally better by enough that you kind of want to click the jurisprudence events, unless the mysticism event has a really good trade-off. You probably want to read through the trade-offs. A lot of the times you're interacting with events. I do think this is better, but efficiency gets diluted, research speed gets diluted, satisfaction equilibrium's not that valuable on the clergy because the tax is not that valuable on the clergy, and their satisfaction bonus gets diluted, I think, in the research speed and the diplo rep. I think it's like +1 diplo. I actually don't know the max diplo rep. I think it might be +1, maybe it's +2. Maybe that's actually kind of a little bit more okay, but I do think overall it's just not the craziest priority. So let's jump into the browsers, jump into that loud car outside, say hell yeah, pop the top down, and drive past the house to make sure that the recordings all have the loud cars in them. But we are going to put this just behind defensive in terms of jurisprudence, and then we are going to put this just ahead of individualism in terms of the mysticism here. Finally, let's take a look at Sinicized versus Unsinicized, which involves being within range or in the sphere of influence of China. I'm not sure what exactly is the requirement that triggers it, but it might be a location within kind of the region, something like this. But taking a look at Sinicized here, we get minus 50% cultural tradition. Again, cultural tradition, not a very important modifier, and then a very strong plus 20% trade capacity. Now, there's other sources of trade capacity, but not a ton, and so this will allow you to just run a whole bunch more trade. Also, 10% monthly research speed progress. That's really valuable as well, although, again, it gets diluted out. 25% legislative efficiency. This will mean... the tooltip's just kind of awful, because the tooltip talks about how quickly you can implement laws, reforms, and estate privileges. And so, thing one, it no longer affects estate privileges anyways, and thing two, the biggest effect it gives is antagonism reduction. And so, really not a fan of the tooltip, but this is actually a pretty strong modifier. It also increases the Middle Kingdom tribute received, but this relates to IO. It's difficult to evaluate how this is. It can be quite a lot. It scales with the size of your income. So this is actually really valuable, but it's hard to evaluate how good it is. But overall, Sinicized is quite strong. And then we have Unsinicized, which gives you plus 50% cultural tradition, don't really care. Minus trade capacity, don't like that. But plus, minus 0.2% prestige decay. I believe the base is something like it's 0.25%, so really that is quite a big decrease, right? Or is this percentage-wise? I think that this is just like getting rid of 80% of the base decay, right, when you're fully unsinicized, and also minus 33% stab cost. This means you can stab up real fast, especially if you're stacking other modifiers here for the decreased stab cost, and so this is going to be a very significant. I do believe it scales such that you decreases the amount that you have to pay for stability investment. The base is 10% of the cost, and so if you get minus 33%, and then get another minus 17%, right, your slider is going to cost half as much. And so it gets cheap to max out the slider. I do think that part is pretty good, but the trade capacity is pretty bad, such that it's kind of maybe a little bit of a wash. I don't know. So the thing is, trade capacity is difficult to evaluate because it doesn't just decrease your trade income by 20%. Your trade is also moving goods, and the goods are affecting the prices inside your economy. And if they're driving up prices, if you're exporting goods, this is increasing your tax base generally, but it's a little complicated. And so what this means is you're going to be double dipping on the amount of money that you're decreasing. And I think that generally speaking, you will probably be losing more money to the lack of trade capacity than you will be gaining from the stab cost decrease, something like this. But it is a little bit difficult to tell. Or actually, maybe you're saving slightly a little bit of money, but it's kind of a little bit of a wash. I don't know, but Sinicized is clearly way better. The thing about Sinicized, and this is really part of where we're going to rank it, is I think if you're over 90% Sinicized, you can roll this nasty disaster. And I haven't played through the disaster, so I don't really know how bad it is, but that this is an aspect of how things go. And I don't know if, for all of these values, which is kind of something we haven't really considered too much or talked about too much, and maybe we'll put this in part of our outro, is that once you're over 50 towards any one of these, it allows you to roll some events, and some events are better than others, and some events, like innovative events, are pretty strong, and so this is something to consider. And I think the Sinicized events are generally net negative, but I don't really have a large sample size on this, and so let's jump into the browser and talk about the rankings. And do the rankings here for the Sinicized and Unsinicized. I do believe that that one is Sinicized. I gotta double check my thing. Yeah, so this is Sinicized. We are going to put it right behind these. I do think it's a very strong value. And then this is Unsinicized, and we're going to put it ahead of... We're going to put it right here. And so this is going to be our finalized tier list that we have. So, to summarize, just briefly mentioning again, for these values, if you push them over 50, you unlock different events. We didn't really consider the events in terms of our evaluation, but it is a reason to maybe push one or the other, or value going over 50, or avoiding the events by staying under 50, this type of consideration. But let's kind of just quickly go through our list here. First of all, this is, I think all of the values, generally speaking, are net positive, and so this doesn't mean we're saying that they're bad. We're saying that it's a priority and we want to make sacrifices to push this versus whatever kind of is in the flow of what value we're pushed towards. We'll just keep going towards that because it is positive, and it's not going to be that big a deal because the bonuses aren't really that large. We're not comparing one value to the other. You see here Centralization and Decentralization both scoring high, but also just generally speaking, the values will take kind of the backseat relative to other considerations, I think fairly often just in general, specifically you handing out privileges and laws that you like, such that you often don't want to sink your privileges and laws to be able to push them. The best example of this is probably that serfdom is a really, really good value, but often you will just want to sink it in order to gain free subjects. But let's go through these real quick. Centralization, incredibly powerful. Crown power is powerful. 50% crown power, 10% proximity cost reduction. There's a few other things for these. We'll just highlight the main points. But this is going to be really, really good because crown power is incredibly good early on. Throttles a bunch of your income. The bonuses in terms of the math are more valuable. The fewer of them you have less in the beginning. But also 10% proximity cost reduction gives you more control. Control flows into everything. The size of the armies you can kind of bring up in terms of manpower and levies, and also the income you bring to bear in terms of both your trade income from increasing your crown power. Incidentally, proximity increases your crown power effectively, and also from your tax base. Next up we have Naval. Naval's a bit of an interesting one, kind of when compared to land here as well, where Naval is going to allow you to push stuff over the seas really, really well, but actually, you know what? There's a lot of countries by which it's not necessarily that good. Maybe this belongs more in A tier, but the thing is when it's good, it's absolutely spectacular, and in particular, the trade range discount I think is quite valuable as you scale into the late game specifically, and running the land trade malice is not that big a deal, whereas on land, the proximity minus 10% proximity cost over land is more valuable than the minus flat proximity cost over seas. but you don't like the trade range malice on the overseas thing, because eventually a lot of your trade is going overseas. Next up, we have serfdom at 20% tax, 20% max tax on peasants, and also I think it has RGO output as well. I don't know if it's 10 or 20%, but it is quite strong. Just often you sink it in order to be able to push your peasant satisfaction up with privileges. Next up, we have capital economy. It gives you 20% production efficiency, very strong in the middle game, kind of scales off a little bit. It gives you discount on buildings, increased food cost, something like this, but it is going to be quite strong because this applies, it's not 20% more income from buildings, because the way production efficiency works, it's generally going to be much larger. Next up, we have plutocracy, really smooths out your parliaments, helps you to generate a lot more money. Then we have aristocracy, similar, allows you to generate a lot more money, keeps the nobles really strong, can be particularly nasty for starts that really want to get off of a particular noble privilege, in which case you want to go plutocracy right away, but in the early game it will generate you more levies, and it also gives 5% discipline, so quite strong. Next up we have Sinicized, which gives more trade capacity, more discount on antagonism, and more research speed, kind of just giving you a lot of everything, going to be quite valuable. Next up we have traditional economy? I'm not sure I remember which one this is. One second. Yes, it is traditional economy. It is going to give you increased pop capacity, increased RGO output, increased food output, and increased building cost. Really, in particular, it shines in areas where you need that pop capacity to still generate pop growth. But with everyone, pop capacity will help with pop growth, just in specifically people who are approaching or at cap. RGO output also very strong in the early game. Generally speaking, I think you early game want traditional economy, and then late game want capital economy. Next up, we have Humanist. The big thing for the Humanist is the tolerance of heathens is going to be good if you're not very expansionary, but you do have heathens. But if you're expansionary, it is going to be, you are going to culture convert a lot faster when you push Humanist. You get plus 50% culture conversion cost, and this can effectively be worth a lot more than 50% because you have culture conversion malices relative to lack of control. So if you have minus 50, if you have 50 control and you have a minus 50% malice, this plus 50% from pushing it all the way is going to double, right, your ability to convert, culture convert people. So this is pretty substantive, and often you have low satisfaction and low control in areas you haven't fully cored yet, and you are culture flipping so that you can core. Next up, we have Liberalism, which is going to give you a state satisfaction equilibrium, and a couple of other things. It's going to give you a decreased cost on your actions in Parliament, and there's one other thing that was particularly useful that I can't... Right, it gives you plus 20% culture's capacity, which is going to be quite nice. We have Decentralization, gives you a little bit of loyalty of subjects, plus 5% is state satisfaction equilibrium. It is going to be nice. As well. Next up, we have free subjects. It gives you prosperity. The big things are prosperity and pop promotion speed. If you don't have access to these are very strong. It also gives a malice to peasants max tax. And so very often, I think that this is maybe the one value you don't want to necessarily push to 100, but being able to establish prosperity through this or pop promotion through this is often for an important gameplay pattern for a lot of countries. It's potentially the case that you want to transition to serfdom later, something like this, which is a little bit of a weird play pattern, but often you need to go this anyways because the stuff that gives peasant satisfaction gives free subjects as well. Next up, we have quantity value. The big thing here is the potential frontage being a strong modifier. It allows you to bring more stats to bear. Generally speaking, I think gameplay patterns promote death stacks, and just being able to bring 25% more guys in is important. They have a malice towards initiative, but don't worry about this malice towards initiative because you have more guys rolling to engage, so the fact that you have a malice to engage is less of a factor because it gets diluted out by virtue of you having more frontage. You get more rolls. That's how you roll. Next up, we have the innovative one, which is the main idea is it going to give you 10% literacy, which not only gives you 10% research speed, it also gives you a lot of things on top of that literacy, like promotion speed 20% or double whatever that literacy rate is. It also gives you burgers, give you a little bit of development speed. There's some nice modifiers in there, and so that is going to be quite valuable. Next up, we have outward, which is just generally going to increase your ability to colonize more than anything. Next up, we have a conciliatory, which is going to decrease the amount of antagonism you take as kind of the main idea, and so that's going to be pretty solid. Next up, we have absolutism, which gives you 100% crown power, but it's at a phase of the game where it's not as useful. It gives you ability to revoke privileges cheaper, but at a time when that's, again, not as useful. It gives you malice to a state satisfaction equilibrium and an increased threshold for pops joining against rebellion or joining rebellions, but that increased threshold is not offset by, or it's more than offset by the satisfaction malice, so you will get more rebels. Next up, we have belligerent. The main idea is it decreases your diplo rep, which conciliatory increases. That's one of the ways in which you're decreasing the antagonism you take. But it also decreases war score cost. If in particular you are doing 100% war score wars on your opponent, you're going for a world conquest, you're pushing a lot of conquest, then belligerent starts to look better. But if that's not the case, if you're not doing the 100% pieces, then it starts to look a little bit worse. And I think in general, maybe pushing a lot of small ball wars is a preferable way to approach. Next up, we have offense. Offense and defense are kind of a weird pair, where I think in single player offense is going to be a lot better, and defense is going to be better in multiplayer. Offense gives troop movement speed and siege and assault ability mainly, and so it's going to be useful for outmaneuvering if you can outmaneuver other people. Next up, we have communalism, which gives a state satisfaction equilibrium. I think it's 2.5%, and also revoke cost. The revoke cost, if you have a really nasty privilege at the game start, can be somewhat useful. It's a little bit hard to push a lot of communalism, though, but it's relatively easy to push. It's relatively free. Next up, we have the Spiritualist. Maybe this is ranked a little bit low, but the problem is it decreases your ability to convert cultures, and I do think that this is kind of a nasty modifier, especially when combined with lack of control, making it so that, in fact, in some situations, this is just extremely bad, because if you have 50 control, that's minus 50% pop conversion speed or assimilation speed, and then if you have 100 spiritualist on top of that, you're just not going to assimilate any pops. It does give you tolerance of true faith, though, and it does give you additional clerics, which do stimulate your economy, but some potentially significant downsides. Next up, we have quality. Quality, the main thing is that it's giving you tactics. It also gives you 20% initiative or 25% initiative. Next up, we have inward, which is potentially insane. I don't know how the control gain stacks with the base control rate, but it might be the case that your control doesn't go down when you're on 100 inward, and if that's the case, that makes the cabinet action insane. That's kind of the biggest thing about inward, is it's maybe insane on that front. It also gives 25% crown power, but at a point in the game where you are already getting a decent amount of crown power. Defense gives you a little bit more combat speed. It improves forts, and this type of thing. I think in multiplayer, you get less move speed, but I think in multiplayer, it's probably better. It also gives you max forts, and fort discount cost. I'm not sure exactly what the metagame looks like in terms of forts, how good forts are, this type of thing, and how important the max fort modifier is, because it's brand new, haven't played that much with it, but if it is important, defense is going to go up. Next up, we have Jurisprudence, which increases, I think, cabinet efficiency and research speed, and also clergy state satisfaction equilibrium. Generally speaking, pretty solid. Generally, we're pushing Jurisprudence over Mysticism. Next up, we have Traditionalism. The main thing is the stability cost reduction is going to be cheaper. So often, if you start with high Traditionalism, I think it's a little bit more worth paying for the slider, or the slider you get a significant discount on. Maybe we've been underutilizing that in some of our runs recently, but it's going to be good in the early game, and then it's going to kind of fall off later on. After that, we have is this free trade. Free trade is going to have some kind of middling, nice-ish trade modifiers, but for the most part, nothing too crazy. A little bit of trade efficiency, but overall, I think the modifiers are kind of weak and not necessarily worth reporting. I think it's kind of the same to degree to with mercantilism, just generally speaking, underwhelming. For this one, we have decreased trade capacity. This is unsinicized, but then cheaper stab costs, slider investment costs. Kind of hard to evaluate. I think generally we're not paying that much for stab slider. That's why we kind of don't value these things that high. And if we lived in an environment where paying for stab slider was better, they'd be a lot better. In general, I think you don't want to push like 100 stab like ever. I think you just want to be positive stab. And so you don't really need a high slider investment in order to achieve that, whereas legitimacy, I do think you need to push 100, and so cost of core is more important than the stab slider investment, just as a general way of looking at this. After that, we have mysticism, which gives a little bit of morale, and it gives clergy estate satisfaction equilibrium. I think that's what it gives. It's fine enough. If you're trending towards mysticism, you kind of want to push it anyways, and that'll be okay. And then we have individualism, which gives a malice to estate satisfaction equilibrium. It also gives migration. I think the migration kind of overcomes the malice, but there's a situation where it maybe doesn't, and maybe this trends into being actively bad territory, which these generally are not, and so that is going to be our overall listing that we have for these in terms of a summary. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, do the YouTube algorithm thing. Also, if you are interested in purchasing the game, have not used it, done so already, if you buy the game from the official Paradox web store and use our code Generalist in all caps, that will send 12% of the sale our way. You will not get a discount, but that is a way to support the channel without spending any more if you were going to buy the game already. If you are not in USD, make sure you cross-reference the price between Steam and the web store, because those can be different, and also several other content creators do have that code, so if you wanted to support someone else, you could make sure to ask them if they have a code first. It really does send quite a bit of money the content creators' way. 12% is a very generous cut, and so this is a major it's a bit. Anyways, other than all that, have a good one. Bye bye now.